I've been thinking for a couple of weeks about Mark's plea for president the other couple of weeks ago, and I would like right now for all of the past presidents of the club to stand up, please. Now, I would like everybody who is not standing up to take a look, and when you say to somebody who asks you to be president, to say it's not convenient, or maybe somebody else can do it, do you think that all of these people, that it was the most convenient thing they could have done the year that they were president? So please give it some thought, and we need a president for 2 years from now. So thank you very much. Now it's my great pleasure today to introduce Barbara Swantson. Barbara has a story to tell, which is not something which we usually hear at a Rotary meeting. Barbara lost her son 3 years ago. He committed suicide, and after that she has developed the courage to, from that very, very tragic experience, to be able to both participate in and assist with the formation of a support group for parents who are in similar situations, and also to establish a prevention program. As somebody who spent 35 years in the school system, I have often thought that there is a classroom of ghosts out there that I taught and was around and with, and I am extremely pleased to see that there is somebody in the community who is able to take this on and do something about this. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Barbara Swantson.
Thank you, Dick. Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm just grateful there. Here we go. Technology. Got to turn it on. Technology. Life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. John Lennon wrote those words to a lullaby, Beautiful Boy. I used to sing that song to my son Terry when he was a little boy, and we danced to that song at his wedding in 2004. My name is Barbara Swantson, and I am here today to remember my beautiful boy, my son, Terrence Swantson, who ended his life by suicide on August 21st, 2010. I'm here to speak about the stigma surrounding mental illness and suicide, and to let you know some of the things you can do to help make a difference. When I Googled stigma definition, the first thing that came up was stigma, a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, activity, or person. The stigma of mental disorder. Suicide knows no boundaries, and we cannot consider suicide prevention without addressing mental illness. 90% of people who complete suicide have a diagnosable mental illness. So mental illness is sometimes a fatal disease, and the fatality is by suicide. And stigma is often what stops those most at risk from getting the help they need. Stigma undermines their memory if they complete suicide, and stigma rubs salt in the wounds of those of us left behind. I grew up in Toronto. I know, not the center of the universe, which is like to believe it is. And my husband Michael, sitting over there, is from Northern Ireland. We began our married life in 1971 in Northern Ireland and left a few years later to come back to Canada. We lived in Montreal for many years, where our daughter Jennifer and our son Terrence were born. And I stayed at home for 10 years, and I loved every minute of it. Terry was a beautiful boy with golden curls, a huge smile, and the biggest shining blue eyes. He was funny and bright, sweet and mischievous, and also very sensitive. He had ADHD and struggled socially. When he was 13, we were transferred to Philadelphia, which was a pretty important age for most kids. And he began acting out and experimenting with marijuana and hanging out with troubled kids. He was now a troubled kid himself. And despite doing everything we could, he was rebellious, and we think he was probably depressed. And in fact, just today I read about a study that has come out which links ADHD and depression starting in teenage years. So that was pretty kind of shook me, actually. In 1998, we moved to Vancouver, but Terry didn't want to move. So with heavy hearts, we left him behind in Philadelphia and set him up in an apartment. After that, he kept us at arm's length, and we struggled to stay connected. Well, I did most of the struggling and pretty much all of the connecting. And then in 2001, he met a young woman. Whoops, I'm going the wrong way. There we go. He met a young woman who eventually became his wife, and we breathed a sigh of relief. They seemed happy together, and we were glad that he was moving on with his life. And then in 2009, Michael and I moved to Campbell River. We had plans to meet Terry and his wife in Northern Ireland to visit the family in September 2010. They were looking forward to seeing him again and to meeting his wife for the first time. August 21st, 2010 was a beautiful day here in Campbell River. I tried calling Terry in the morning and I got no answer. My friend and I were out having a lovely morning together when her husband called and asked us to please drop back at her house before going out for lunch. As I pulled into the driveway, I was surprised to see Michael's car there. When I walked into the living room, he was standing there with the most stricken look I have ever seen on his face. And he spoke the words that shattered my life. Terrence committed suicide. Everything stopped. The air was sucked out of my lungs and I felt like I was in a surreal horror movie. And I remember thinking, he's in hospital, but he's going to be okay. And then knowing he would never be okay again. No, 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 this can't be true. Oh God, oh no, my son. No. I felt like I was falling down a hole with no bottom. But it was all too true. He was gone. I later learned that at about 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, life happened, and our son, our beautiful boy, ended his life with a gunshot to his head, just 1 week short of his 30th birthday. He must have been preparing to do that when I had called earlier and he didn't answer. What if he had answered? What if? When he took his life, Terry shattered our plans. He shattered my heart, my sense of security, and my life changed forever. It was, and still is, unfathomable, and we've both struggled to come to terms with his irrevocable act. The day after he died, I spoke with a friend who told me she had attempted suicide years earlier in the grip of a terrible depression. She described what she called a suicidal coma, a place where there was only pain, where the darkness was so complete that she could not remember the love she felt for anyone else, nor feel the love they had for her. It seemed clear to her that the only way to stop her pain was to die. Fortunately, she survived, and she eventually realized that she didn't want to die. She wanted the pain to stop. She told me I would never understand why, that she does not really understand why she did it. She said a suicidal coma comes from an irrational state of mind that you cannot understand from a rational one. This was my first step in beginning to come to terms with my son's death. We eventually learned that Terry took his life while suffering from a profound depression. His wife and his closest friends had tried desperately to convince him to get help, but he rebuffed all of their attempts. Terry left a note, a 3-part note addressed to his wife, his family, and one of those friends. She's a social worker, and to her he wrote, "You could not help me because I would not let you. I love you." Why? Why? With so much love and support, why did he refuse their help? I believe he felt ashamed, worthless, and hopeless. That admitting he was sick and needed help was too shameful, that he did not feel worthy of being helped, and that he believed there was no hope. Have you ever not gone to a doctor when you had the flu or a sinus infection? Sure, we've all not gone to the doctor sometimes when we're sick. Have you ever not told something to someone because you were afraid of what they might think? We have certainly all done that, not said something because we were afraid of what others might think about us. So it isn't surprising that people who are depressed or anxious or thinking about suicide don't always ask for help or go to the doctor. They are afraid of what people will think or say. Come on, get over it. Your life's great. You must be nuts. You're one of those. Remember when we called cancer the big C? When unwed pregnancy, domestic violence, and homosexuality were totally taboo subjects? Mental illness and suicide are still taboo. People don't want to hear about them or speak about them. I know. I experienced the deafening silence after Terry died. Hardly anyone would speak to me about his life or how he died. I felt so isolated and alone. We must make the unspeakable speakable. What are the first words you think of when I say mental health? First words, what comes to mind?
Governments.
Governments.
Sorry.
That's all right. Mental health. Depression, sick, anxious, hopeless, bad behavior. This is what most of us think about when we think about mental health. This is what our culture has taught us. People who are crazy, not me. What are the first words you think about when I say mental illness? Pretty much the same words. Lots of people think mental health and mental illness are the same thing. But mental health is how we act, feel, relate to others, make decisions, how we do life. When you got up in the morning, you got out of bed because you made a decision to do that. It has nothing to do with mental illness. If you have a brain, you have mental health. We all have mental health. It is our emotional, cognitive, and psychological well-being. Mental illness is a medical condition that disrupts a person's ability to think, feel, act, relate. It affects our brains. What do you think about when I say physical health? I'm sure you're not usually this quiet. What do you think of physical health? Having a good meal, getting out and exercising, being in good shape. When we think about physical health, we think about positive things. When we think about mental health, we think about negative things. Crazy, nuts, depressed, sick. When we think about mental illness, we feel uncomfortable. We shy away, we joke about it. We think mental illness happens to them. It couldn't happen to me. I'm okay. That's stigma. Remember that Google definition? Stigma, a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person. The example they gave was the stigma of mental disorder. But in any given year, 1 in 4 people will have an issue with their mental health. 1 in 4 people. That's 1 in 4 people in this room. So start to look around. Who might it be? Maybe you're counting off. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Oh yeah, you. 4. Notice how there's a little laughter. We feel a little uncomfortable. But what if I were to say to you that unfortunately in your lifetime, 1 in 4 people in this room will die from cancer? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Nobody is laughing now. Why? Cancer isn't funny. No one jokes about cancer, yet we joke about mental illness. That is stigma. Mental illness isn't funny. People who might need help don't go for it because they're afraid of being one of them, afraid of what people might think. My son refused help even though it was offered. Even some mental health professionals are not immune. I read a paper recently where the author wrote, "We receive frequent client feedback on the experience of condescending, judgmental, less than empathetic attitudes from mental health treatment providers. Many people do not seek help, do not even tell those closest to themselves, or frankly admit it to themselves, that they are in pain, that they might have ideas of suicide because they feel ashamed, worthless, and hopeless." So who is at risk for mental illness? We all are. 1 in 4 people in this room will be affected this year. It could even be you. When my son died, I sustained what I call a traumatic emotional brain injury. I was lost in a grief pit, and there were times that I wished I could join him. The fact is that after the suicide of a loved one, the survivor's risk of suicide goes up. I started doing some writing, and last August I sent out an open letter to a grieving parent, from a grieving parent, to many people. After I sent it out, so many people thanked me for sharing my story and for offering some simple things they could do faced with someone in pain or grief, or someone who might be suffering depression or possibly even considering suicide. I suggested they take time to listen, and you can do this too, to speak to them about it. That speaking about suicide does not cause someone to become suicidal or increase the risk. And in fact, showing genuine concern by asking directly about if someone is going to harm themselves can be part of an immediate intervention. People also told me their stories about their own mental illness, suicidal thoughts, and their reluctance to talk, their fear because of the stigma and shame of being found out. And I realized that my letter had begun to change people's attitudes, to open their minds so they could open their hearts. It was the beginning of my new path, my purpose, to facilitate a fundamental shift in the perception of mental health, mental illness, and suicide. In November 2012, I spoke at a professional conference called Suicide Prevention, What Works, in Belfast, Northern Ireland. There were speakers from New Zealand, the United States, and Britain talking about the latest research, presenting papers, and then there was me. And I gave them essentially the same speech I'm giving you today. And when I got back to Campbell River, I met with some other parents whose children had died by suicide. And we all felt we wanted to do something to make a difference so that our children will not have died in vain. Someone mentioned that she heard about a walk called Move for Mental Health to raise awareness about mental illness, to reduce stigma, and to encourage Canadians to become more involved with their mental well-being. We checked out the website, defeatdepression.ca, and we decided to organize a walk in Campbell River. So we rolled up our sleeves, and on May 26, 2013, we will host the first annual Move for Mental Health event in Campbell River, a 5-kilometer walk starting at Robert Osler Park at 11 a.m. Our objectives are to eliminate the stigma of mental health and suicide, to raise acceptance and understanding of mental illnesses, to encourage people to seek early intervention and treatment, and to raise funds to support local mental health organizations. Throughout my talk, there have been slides with faces of people who have completed suicide. You saw all ages. I believe the youngest one was 9, and all different races, genders. No one is immune. No one. Actually, the group most at risk for suicide are men from 45 to white men from 45 to 65. The World Health Organization estimates that by 2020, depression will be the second leading cause of disability in the world. In Canada, mental health claims are the fastest growing category of disability, and in BC they cost more than $1 billion annually. So how can you help? This is the first walk that we're organizing, and we need help to spread the word. So, when you go out today, start to talk about it. We'll be starting to see some things in the media closer to the time. We need sponsors. We need volunteers. We're a pretty small group right now, so this is a volunteer organization. You know about the Move for Bodies. We need some donations to help with expenses. We want to get t-shirts. We're hoping to get water donated, but there will be some startup expenses. Any money that we do raise from donations that people come will go to local mental health organizations. We haven't decided which ones yet, but we're certainly in talks with some. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, well, what about, or you could, if you are, please come and see me. Please talk to me about it. I'll give you my card, contact me. I want you to remember that if you have a brain, you have mental health, that we all have mental health, and that any one of us can fall victim to mental illness. We need to speak about the reality and impact of mental illness, that mental illness is sometimes fatal, and the fatality is by suicide. We need to let people know how the stigma and silence surrounding mental illness and suicide contributes to these deaths. We must not let silence prevail in the wake of tragedy. We must speak up and replace the stigma with compassion and understanding. We must make the unspeakable speakable by opening people's minds so they can open their hearts. My deepest hope is that I can help to eliminate the stigma around mental illness so that no one will feel so ashamed, worthless, or hopeless that they complete with suicide rather than seeking help, and that no one will ever know the excruciating pain and suffering of losing a loved one to suicide again. Then my beautiful boy, my Terry, will not have died in vain. Thank you. Namaste.
If anybody has any questions for Barbara, she'd be happy to answer them. Jim.
I'd like to congratulate you on your courage to speak about such a personal thing.
Thank you.
Now a question, what's your opinion of assisted suicide for people that are physically ill at their older age?
That is for me the one area where if somebody is terminally physically ill and in pain, that is not an irrational decision. That is a rational choice. And that's very different from someone who is suffering from a mental illness, who is in a suicidal coma, who cannot. I'm going to tell you a little story about a really good friend of ours who has had very, very serious breast cancer in the early 90s. She had surgery, radiation and chemotherapy, and almost died from it. She also suffers from bipolar disorder and has had several major depressions in her life. And the day we were leaving for Belfast, my husband and I were staying in her house in Coquitlam, and we were talking about it. She doesn't talk. She talks to everybody about her cancer. She doesn't talk to a lot of people about her bipolar or about her depression. And she said to me, if somebody were to say that I could choose between depression or cancer, give me cancer. Now, most of us, the idea of cancer is probably the thing we dread the most. She said, compared, and this blew me away, blew us both away. She said, compared to depression, cancer was fun. She said, I don't mean the disease. She said, the people came around, they helped me, they believed me. Nobody questioned, nobody looked at me as if to say, you know, come on, you've got a good life, what's the matter with you? And she said, and the other thing, even at my worst moments, and she almost died a couple of times, she said, even at my worst moments with cancer, I always had hope. She said, when I am in the grip of a depression, I can't remember that things were ever better, and I can't fathom that they ever will be better. So there is no hope. So that's the difference, to come back to your question. People who have a terminal illness, there is no hope. And they may be looking at, there was a man interviewed on CBC recently who had Huntington's chorea. And he said he watched his father die, and he chose assisted suicide. And he said, and listening to him, I completely agree with that. I mean, I think that is a choice. So thank you for the question.
Bill?
Are you aware of the latest research project out? It's quite an extensive one on the correlation between ADHD
Yes, I just referred to.
and mental illness later in life in the 30s or so.
Yes, I just started reading about that this morning. So I haven't had a chance to really look at it closely, but certainly that correlates to our own experience. Our son was diagnosed in grade 3 with ADHD, and I believe he started to have some depression when he hit adolescence, probably around 13 or 14. Although he hid it, we know that he did cut himself in his teens. He self-medicated with marijuana from the age of 13 right through his whole life, but he would not go as an adult to get help. So yes, I am aware of that research. I'm not quite sure where that's going to go, but...
Just one more.
Sure.
As you're aware and involved in it, what always appalls me, and it's still there, is I'm not going to say it's apathy, it almost borders on apathy of some of the people and the professionals that are dealing with mental health. They're all stuck in their own little silo, and they are not talking to each other, and they're not coordinating. And one that really disturbs me is the Privacy Act and freedom of information when you have someone who is mentally ill that you can't find out or assist them in their treatment. And you're trying to tell me that somebody that's mentally ill has the right to say, I don't want to take my medication? It's just.
It's a fine line. It's a fine line.
It's abysmal.
Yeah, it is. And
Congratulate you on your work, keep it up.
Thank you. Unfortunately, with mental illness, there are lots of effective treatments around, but there are lots of people who have mental illnesses who, despite the best treatment that's available, it doesn't seem to really make that much difference. So there are certain mental illnesses that are treatment resistant, and certain people who, for whatever reason, it's just my friend that I was alluding to, she's been on so many different kinds. Well, first of all, she was misdiagnosed as having depression, and it was only been in the last 5 years that she was diagnosed with bipolar. And she's now on a different category of drugs, which is helpful, but she still suffers from depression. So, yes.
Hang on, Colin. Brian? I'll come back to you, Colin.
Thank you. Barbara, reading some local research, I just have to be reading some research lately, about over 5% of people in Canada and Western Europe are claiming some sort of disability insurance, in the working age people, 19 to 65. And the majority of those people are suffering from depression. In the United States, and why it's a big problem down there, is over 9%, because of their laws or whatnot, are claiming some sort of disability from work. The majority of those people are suffering from depression. So depression, mental illness, is the leading cause of, or a leading cause of lack of productivity for their economy and for our economy. So it's not just somebody in a trailer someplace, whatever, it affects everybody. The second point is, in one of my many previous lives, I was a high school counselor, and this will be familiar with Tom and Ray. Mental health, mental balance, emotional issues are front and center for a lot of teenage kids. At some time in their school career, virtually all of them find themselves painted into some sort of corner. They come out of it, thankfully. You know, Tom and counselors, whatnot, other people, parents, coaches, whatnot. But it is front and center for teenagers, maybe more so than for a lot of the rest of us. So I think it's just my plug is I think it's really important. If you know teenagers or you coach them, don't be afraid to talk about it, because they're thinking about it not all the time, but quite a bit.
Well, certainly adolescence is a time which I think most of us can remember, where as we're between being a child and an adult, we're trying to figure out who we are. And yeah, a lot of, I would say the vast majority of teenagers, you know, have some emotional issues. And in fact, I tend to look on mental health and mental, I don't even want to use the word illness, but if looking at mental health is we all have a brain, we all have mental health, it's our emotional, cognitive, and psychological well-being. We all have moods. You ever had a bad day or a bad week? Have you ever been anxious about something that's coming up? Have you ever been in a really bad situation, either at work or in a relationship or whatever, that really affected your life for a while, your decision-making abilities? That's a disruption in your mental health. We all face that in our lives. And sometimes, I mean, every week, there, you know,